85 The Teachings of the Lord of the Second Coming. Section 7 The Providence of Restoration and the Progress of History. The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth is a society whose structure is formed in the image of a perfect person. 17 Likewise, fallen society may be regarded as formed in the likeness of a fallen person. We can better understand the history of societies built by sinful humanity by examining the inner life of a fallen person. A fallen person possesses both an original mind, which prompts him to pursue goodness, and an evil mind, which fills him with evil desires and rebels against the promptings of the original mind. Undeniably, the two minds are constantly at war with each other, inclining us toward shifting and conflicting behaviors. Since human society is composed of individuals who are constantly at war within themselves, interactions among them cannot help but be full of discord and conflict. Human history has consisted of people's conflict-ridden social relationships, constantly changing with the course of time. Hence, it has necessarily unfolded in strife and warfare. Nevertheless, in the midst of the persistent fight between the original mind and the evil mind, people are ever striving to repel evil and follow the way of goodness. As they gain ground in their striving, their efforts bear fruit in righteous deeds. Because of the activity of the original mind within himself, even a fallen person can respond to God's providence of restoration and join in furthering the goal of goodness. Progress in history thus originates with individuals who, even amidst the vortex of good and evil, make determined efforts to reject evil and promote goodness. Therefore, the world toward which history is progressing is the kingdom of heaven, where the goal of goodness will be realized. We must understand that conflicts and wars are interim phenomena to separate good from evil in the pursuit of this ultimate goal. Even though evil may triumph at times, God will use it to steer history toward the fulfillment of a greater good. In this respect, we can recognize that the progress of history toward goodness is driven by a process of constantly dividing good from evil, according to God's providence of restoration. Meanwhile, on the basis of his relationship of blood ties with the first human beings, Satan has worked through fallen people to realize, in advance of God, a perverted form of the ideal society which God intends to realize. As a result, in human history we witness the rise of unprincipled societies, which are built upon twisted versions of the principle. At the end of human history, before God can restore the kingdom of heaven on earth, Satan will have built an unprincipled world in a distorted image of the kingdom. This is none other than the communist world. This is an instance of how Satan, who had a head start in the course of history, has always mimicked God's plans in advance of God. In the course of the providence of restoration, a false likeness precedes the appearance of the true. 18 Jesus' prophecy that false Christs will appear before the second advent of Christ. 19 can be elucidated by this aspect of the principle. 7.1 The progress of history. In the age of the providence of restoration, some historians have held that the first society built by fallen people was a primitive collective society. From the viewpoint of God's providence, the primitive societies which fallen people built were centered on Satan, though Satan may have tried to build a collective society where people shared their possessions with each other. It would still have been only a defective imitation of the society which God intends to build through people of perfect character, a society characterized by interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. Regardless of the form, this satanic primitive society could not have been free of struggle and division. If it had been, it would have perpetuated its existence forever without change, and God's providence of restoration could never have been fulfilled. In reality, the two minds at war within a fallen person give rise to internal conflicts, which manifest themselves through his actions, and cause him to be in conflict with others. Therefore, it would have been impossible for a satanic primitive society pursuing the goal of collective living ever to maintain peace. As primitive societies evolved into larger-scale societies, with different economic and social relations, these conflicts inevitably evolved in a corresponding manner. Due to the activity of the original mind, calling people to respond to God's providence of restoration, divisions between relative good and evil surely arose in primitive societies under satanic sovereignty. When we examine the course of social development guided by Satan, we find that clan societies arose out of the divisions between individuals in primitive societies. These societies have tended to expand in scope, with clan societies developing into feudalistic societies and then into monarchic societies. By increasing their territory and power, Satan preempted this pattern ahead of God, because he understood God's plan to call good individuals out of the sinful world and have them build a good clan society, then expand to a good feudalistic society, and finally reach the stage of a good kingdom with territory and sovereignty. sufficient for the Messiah to come and accomplish his work. God called Abraham out of the sinful world, to be the standard bearer of goodness, and blessed him with descendants who would uphold the will of God. God raised up Abraham's descendants into the first Israelite clan society. They entered Egypt as a clan society, but by the time they left Egypt for Canaan, they had grown into a tribal society. Israelite society in the period of the Judges was a feudalistic society. A feudalistic society in this discussion refers to a society with a political system characterized by master-servant relationships of service and obedience, and an economic system composed of self-sufficient units in small, isolated territories. In the period of the Judges, Israelite society had such characteristics. When the Israelites entered Canaan, a portion of land was allocated to each tribe. The judges who ruled these territories played a role similar to that of bishops and feudal lords in early medieval Europe. It is the nature of a feudalistic society that its people espouse the beliefs of their Lord and obey his commands. As long as the Lord remains faithful to the will of God, his people will follow him and stand on God's side. Living in a political system built on master-servant relationships, and having a self-sufficient economy, largely isolated from the outside world, they have considerable capacity to withstand Satan's invasion from outside. The main reason that a clan society develops into a feudalistic society is to bring property and people, which had belonged to Satan, back to God's side. By expanding the territory under God's sovereignty, they are better placed to ward off Satan's invasion. Understanding this divine providence, Satan tried to preserve his rule by preempting it, and forming his own feudalistic societies many centuries earlier. The providential purpose of the feudalistic society of early Israel was to lay a foundation for the establishment of a monarchic society with greater territory and more powerful sovereignty. The monarchic society amalgamated the smaller units of political and economic sovereignty secured by the earlier feudalistic society into a single territory with a large population, a strong economy and a well-defended sovereignty. This was done with the establishment of the United Kingdom of Israel. Founded by King Saul, Jesus was to come as the King of Kings. God built the monarchic society in Israel to prepare a strong enough foundation for him to come as the Messiah and rule as King of Kings. Long before this, Satan understood the providence to receive the Messiah behind the construction of the monarchy, and had formed his own monarchic societies to block God's providence. Many centuries before the founding of the United Kingdom of Israel, the first dynasty of Egypt had been founded, and pharaonic Egypt continued through some 30 dynasties. The ancient kingdom of Babylon had ruled all of Mesopotamia during the reign of King Hammurabi. In the 18th century B.C., and the Hittites ruled supreme over the Near East in the region of Syria. During the 14th century B.C., even within the Satanic world, there was constant warfare between relatively good kingdoms and relatively evil kingdoms, resulting in the separation of good from evil. This drive toward goodness is rooted in the original mind, which responds to the call of God's providence of restoration. Had King Solomon served God's will until the end, he could have exercised his God-given political skills to unify the nations of the Near East. He could have assimilated the Egyptian, Minoan and Mesopotamian civilizations, which were weak at that time. He thus would have built a worldwide dominion to which the Messiah could come and realize God's sovereignty on earth. Unfortunately, Solomon fell into idolatry. Consequently, God had to begin a dispensation to dismantle this monarchic society, which he had so painfully built up. Since the kings of the United Kingdom of Israel did not lay the foundation for the Messiah, nor complete the groundwork upon which God could restore his sovereignty, God eventually divided the kingdom into two: Israel in the north and Judah in the south. When they continued to transgress against God's will, God let the northern kingdom of Israel be destroyed at the hands of the Gentile nation of Assyria. The Assyrians in the 8th century B.C. had conquered the entire ancient Near East, including Egypt, to build the First World Empire. The kingdom of Judah upheld God's will for a time, but then rebelled against him. Hence, God allowed it to fall into the hands of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which had supplanted Assyria as the Second World Empire. After the fall of Judah, God kept the throne of Israel vacant, and put the Jewish people under the control of successive Gentile empires for most of the period leading up to the coming of the Messiah. Most notably, God placed them in the Hellenistic cultural sphere, which laid the ideological framework for democracy. God fashioned Israel's society in the form of democracy in order that when the Messiah came, he could be hailed as their king by the will of the people, who should have welcomed him wholeheartedly. However, the Jewish public did not so elevate Jesus. Without public support, he was crucified. Consequently, at the consummation of the providence which had begun 2,000 years earlier, with the calling of Abraham and his descendants out of the sinful world, its purpose was attained only spiritually.